we're here now with President Trump's first press secretary, Sean Spicer. Thanks for coming in.
You bet.
This morning,
Happy New
Sean.
Year.
Happy New Year to you. We saw the president's tweet right there. He said he authorized no access to Michael Wolfe. But Michael Wolfe did have pretty wide access to the West Wing, didn't he?
Well, I think there's a question about what the president authorized and whether or not Michael Wolfe set up individual meetings with staffers.
You met with him.
I did meet with him. Of course, I met with several authors, as you know, someone who's been in the White House before. When people contact you, I'd never met Michael Wolfe. He had contacted me and said that he was writing a book on the president, wanted to introduce himself to me and request an interview with the president. So I afforded him that courtesy. I spoke to him several times about questions that he had. But it's pretty clear, from what I understand, that he met with Steve Bannon on multiple occasions.
And others in the West Wing.
As far as I know, as far as I'm aware, yeah. But those are individual meetings that were set up with those staffers. Steve is the only one that I'm aware of right now that's actually admitted to meeting with him.
He says quite a bit about you in the book. Yeah. Says your personal mantra at the time was, "You can't make this blank up," something I can't say on morning television. Is that true?
Well, he had asked me, I think, a question about whether or not some of these instances were said, and I said, you can't make this up. But again, I think one of the problems that we're seeing with this book, and it's not just Trump staffers and White House officials pushing back, but you're seeing a lot of mainstream media members as well calling into question the sourcing, the sloppiness of how he attributes stuff. Even the author's note at the beginning of the book notes that in many cases he took anecdotes and sort of rephrased them. The sourcing, as with...
Basically, is the story that he writes a story that you think is basically true?
No, I think there's some anecdotes that may be true, but there's also the problem I have, George, is that with this book, as with many stories, is that if it's 10% or 20% or 50% or 70% that isn't true, the reader's not left to know which is true and which is not.
But the stuff he wrote about you is true.
No, well, some of the quotes that he has, but in the context in which they're given aren't. And I think that's the problem, is that I can say something to you right now, and you could weave it into a story in 3 weeks. And is the quote accurate? Sure. Is the context in which I'm giving it in accurate? No.
You were one of those sources. I guess my big question now is it smart for the president to try to stop publication of this book? Doesn't that run against the First Amendment?
I think there's a difference between defamation and reporting, and I think in some of these cases where you're making wild accusations about the president and his family, he absolutely has a right to defend himself.
A lot of focus also on the possibility of obstruction of justice. We learned from the New York Times again this morning that Special Counsel Robert Mueller is investigating that in the White House. I don't think
that's any. I mean, I think that's been previously reported that that was being looked at. So that's not some kind of shocker.
Well, not shocker, but there were some new details here where we see the president asking his counsel to try to stop Jeff Sessions from resigning, from recusing himself from the Russia investigation. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't at the time, but I think it's no secret. The president's made it very clear that he didn't feel as though Attorney General Sessions needed to recuse himself from this matter, and that he wanted a robust defense of something that he doesn't think that he's been wrongly accused of.
Did he really say, according to the New York Times, "Where's my Roy Cohen"? Were you aware of that?
I don't know what he said. That's the New York Times, according to anonymous sources, not that I'm aware of.
What you do know, you know a fair amount about the firing of James Comey. You had to go out the night that happened. You laid it all on the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, at that time.
Correct.
That turned out not to be true.
I went with the information I had at the time.
Who gave you that information?
Well, I think the counsel's office laid it out very clear how the process had worked. That the authority to fire Rod Rosenstein, or excuse me, the FBI director, laid solely with the Deputy Attorney General. As far as organizationally how that worked out, that there was a letter that the Deputy Attorney General had written to the president, or to the Attorney General, laying out the case for the firing of Jim Comey as FBI director. The Attorney General concurred and brought that to the president. That was the information that I was given, and that was the information that I presented.
We now know that for several days, at least, the president had been talking about firing James Comey. He had talked to Reince Priebus, your direct boss, about that as well. You weren't aware of that at all?
No.
This article says that Reince Priebus turned over notebooks to the special counsel. It's also been reported by Axios that you had several notebooks as well from your time in the RNC and the White House. Did you turn those over to the special counsel?
All I'll say is that as a press person, it shouldn't come as any surprise that you write down, this reporter called, this is the time that they called, these are the questions they had, and sometimes the response that you're going to give. Beyond that, I'm not going to comment on the special counsel or anything that's going on with respect to that.
The book also gets into that episode in July when you were still at the White House, where the president was working on a false statement about Don Jr.'s meeting at Trump Tower. And it talks about you being out of the loop on that and you being happy to be out of the loop. So you knew nothing about that false statement when it was written?
Correct. And again, all I'll say is that I'm not even going to get into the merits of the statement or not. I'll just say that I was not aware of the drafting of that statement.
It says that Mark Corallo, the president's spokesperson, his personal spokesperson with his lawyers, resigned at that time because he was concerned it could be seen as obstruction of justice. Are you confident that the president did nothing wrong?
As far as what aspect? As far as the campaign and the collusion, absolutely. I was there for most of the end part of the campaign. I know that didn't happen. There were several folks in the media that didn't give us credit for colluding with ourselves, never mind with any kind of foreign government. So to suggest that happened, and the underlying premise of this whole thing, I think, is pretty clear that there was no collusion.
But you're not confident the president did nothing wrong with respect to his actions in the White House, the firing of James Comey, the putting out of this.
Well, I think as far as the firing of James Comey, it's been pretty clear that the president has the authority to fire anyone within the federal government that he sees fit isn't doing the duty that is appropriate for that job. So I don't think that there's any question about his ability to fire Jim Comey or anyone else in the federal government.
But do you think he did anything wrong?
I don't. But again, it's not my job. There's an investigation. I'm not going to get in the way of it. But as far as I know and from what I saw, no, there was nothing that was ever done that I think was inappropriate or illegal.
Sean Spicer, thanks for coming in this morning.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.